Good morning and good afternoon, guys, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. My name's Malcolm Groves, for those of you who I haven't met. And I just like to introduce you to David, for those who haven't met, David Millington. G'day, David.
G'day, how's it going?
Good, good. So we've still got people coming in, but I think it's time that we kick off. So as I said, thank you everyone for joining. What we're going to go through today is to go through the overview of the new RAD Studio 12. So that's both Delphi 12 and C++ Builder 12. We'll go over the features, go over a bunch of demos with it. And David's going to be driving a lot of it. I'm going to be basically the proxy for the audience, so I'll try and ask him questions and clarify things. But if you guys have questions while we're going through the session, there is a questions cunningly named window in GoToWebinar called questions. So if you submit your questions in there, either David or myself will answer them while we're going through. Once we get to the end of the demos and all of the information, we'll open it back up and we'll do maybe cover off some questions that were easier answered like live rather than typing, or maybe more commonly asked questions, that kind of thing. So hang around till the end. I'll also have some links and stuff at the end for some guidance on how you can get hold of RAD Studio 12. If you don't know what your serial number is or can't remember it or whatever, how to find that out, all that sort of thing. So hang around until the end, and we'll go through that. But I don't think you came to primarily listen to me. I think you mostly came to listen to David. So I'm going to shut up now and hand over to David to start taking us through RAD Studio 12.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Malcolm. Look, it's really good to be here, and also specifically to be talking to people in the general APAC region. I'm Australian, actually, for those of you who don't know, but I'm not normally in the Australian or you're anywhere around here kind of time zone. So it's a real pleasure to actually be here and able to join you live. And yeah, definitely looking forward to the live Q&A at the end that Malcolm mentioned. But we should get into it. So just have a couple of introductory slides, and then we'll move on to the main presentation. So Malcolm, if you wouldn't mind. Next slide, please. So many of you are probably familiar with Embarcadero and IDEA, but if you're not, IDEA is a US-based developer tools company, and it owns a huge number of different companies in DevOps and testing and that sort of general space. I've been here for a few years and I stopped counting at the 17th. And you can see most of them on screen right now. There's Embarcadero, which we're here today, Automato, which is also relevant. They make something called Visual Assist, which we'll talk about later. And then a bunch of other tools around APIs or web or testing or source control hosting, such as Assembler, a whole variety of things, basically anything that you might need in the developer space. IDEA has a company and a product for. Next slide, please. And again, many of you are probably very familiar with RAD Studio, Delphi, and C++ Builder. But if not, RAD Studio is the term we give for our IDE and development tool, which has two languages, Delphi and C++, which you can also get independently. And it is an IDE for building high-performance native applications, either in Delphi, which is Object Pascal, or C++. Particular focus on strong visual design and integrated tool chains across the various platforms. Next slide, please. And the number of things that makes RAD Studio particularly great. One of the big ones, of course, is the community, which is you. And it's really great to see so many people online today. We have a big community of people worldwide, plus a whole bunch of technology partners, MVPs, authors, people who blog, that kind of thing. And it's absolutely fantastic. This is actually one of the reasons I really like these live webinars, because it's a really good chance to actually engage and talk face to face. As I mentioned, that's why I like the live Q&A so much. So thank you all for attending and being part of that. But on screen, of course, you can see some of the other things that we think make RAD Studio great. Visual design, of course, is very strong. Backwards compatibility. We try to design our APIs right. You might be familiar with other platforms where there's constant churn of things. We try to make technology that can be relied on. And if you choose today, you'll still be able to use its evolution easily in 10 years' time. Productivity, databases, and of course, being native. Those are our key tenets. Next slide, please. So today we're focusing on RAD Studio 12 Athens, which came out just a few weeks ago. So the main presentation has been put together by many people. It is a gigantic release. So we have Nuno Castro, one of the PMs, Kyle Wheeler, who's our general manager, and he sets the sort of general direction for the product. Marco Cantu, who you're probably all familiar with, and looks after Delphi. Myself, I tend to look after C++ and the IDE. Stephen Ball and Ian Barker. Stephen works in general sort of outreach, and Ian, again, is our community manager. And of course, today we have a special guest in the form of Malcolm. Next slide, please. Possibly next 2 slides, because the next slide is actually just introducing the name RAD Studio 12 Athens. But the slide after this has our splash screens. So RAD Studio has both CBuilder and Delphi. Those are the new splashes, which I happen to really like. I think they're great, this release. The color, especially the red one, to me is a slight callback to some of the sort of red-orange branding that we used to have a while ago. One thing I particularly want to note, though, is that C++ Builder 12 includes Visual Assist for C++ Builder. It's our first version, our first integration of this. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. And next slide, please. Almost done, because I just want to introduce the agenda. Now, RAD Studio 12 is a gigantic release. And the webinar that we have today has a whole lot of material. And even though it's really packed, and we put in as much as possible and tried to keep the time, the length sane, there is an awful lot that we just haven't covered, even in this. So, after this, I do recommend checking out the What's New page on the DocWiki, all the various blogs that have come out. But that said, we're going to try and cover everything important that we can with C++. For those of you who use Delphi, stick around for this section, because we've had a lot of great feedback, even from Delphi people, on what's coming for C++. And then, of course, after that, moving on to the installer and IDE in general, FireMonkey and Skier, which is very exciting. Things about the VCL data, Delphi, of course, and quality. Now, it's a mega webinar and it's huge, so I won't take up any more time. As Malcolm mentioned, please ask questions using the questions panel and go to webinar. We'll both be online answering them in text. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A and we can answer live. All right, Malcolm, please take it away.
I want to start with what I think is one of the most amazing things we've ever done for RAD Studio, and that's the inclusion of Visual Assist for C++. Visual Assist is a sister product within IDEA, and it's a productivity plugin for C++ and C# developers using Visual Studio. Pretty much any software you use has been written with its help. I can't name names, but I can say that you've likely used multiple items of software already today, or even possibly to watch this right now, that Visual Assist helped create. It really helps productivity, and it's been a key part of Windows C++ development for years, and now it's joined C++ Builder. We had a preview webinar in August, but we showed you only a few things in that webinar. What we're delivering in RAD Studio 12 goes past what we showed in our preview. We are shipping more features than we previewed. I'm going to start off with some good features, and there's a whole host of great things, and move on to showing you something that I think is about the most amazing feature ever. Let's begin with code completion. In C++ Builder 12, we still support LSP and cQuery, but by default, all code insight features are provided by Visual Assist, and that includes tooltips and parameter completion, which we haven't even got time to cover here, and just for the sake of time, that single sentence is it for describing those features. But when using Visual Assist for Code Insight, you're using a new Code Insight engine. Focusing on the code completion part of Code Insight, It's important to note that this is very different to our previous code completion. Don't expect the same thing. Previous code completion was essentially based on a compiler, and so often required code to be in good compilable shape, and its results were always from the compiler, and therefore completely 100% correct. Visual Assist, though, has a fuzzy parser, and it can happily handle code that won't compile. It will do everything it can to understand the code no matter what. And although Visual Assist obviously parses and understands your code and presents completion based on the type of your symbols as you'd expect, as well as a flexible fuzzy parser, it is also heuristic in results. As well as completely standard suggestions, it will suggest things that may or may not be what you're looking for, so you will get different behavior than with cQuery or even classic completion. It is also very fast, incredibly fast. Even better, it can suggest things that technically it doesn't even know about. In the screenshot on the left, you can see it suggesting the standard library map classes. But the code that it's suggesting inside, the code where the text cursor is placed and you're completing in, doesn't have the headers for stdmap or multimap or unordered map included. So, how does Visual Assist know how to suggest them? Well, other than magic, it can do this because it's not aware just of the current file and what the current file uses or includes, the way previous code completion was, but because it's aware of the entire set of headers available to your project. And so it can suggest things you might want to use, whether those are standard library types or even types in your own project you just haven't added the include for yet. A natural question might be, can Visual Assist both suggest something in code completion and also add the include for you? And I'll get back to that in a minute. But that's code completion as provided by Visual Assist, which is the default now in 12.0. Definitely different. It's the same feature, but not an exact replacement, and you'll likely have the best success with it regarding it as something new. It's fast, amazingly fast. It's fuzzy, it produces results even when code doesn't compile, and is heuristic, and it can even suggest things that aren't even in your code yet. Let's move on to refactorings. In the webinar preview in August, we previewed one refactoring. Well, we're shipping 4, 2 major ones and 2 minor ones. And these address common things you need to do in your code. Refactoring is all about code maintenance. As you develop, you need to change code, you need to move it around, keep it up to date, change things. That's what refactorings are there to help you do. And the key things we've added in version 12 help you rename a method or type anywhere it's used in your project group. This is what we previewed in the August webinar. But there are other things you might want to do, such as automatically add the right include for the code you've written. Or, taking some inspiration from a Delphi feature, you might want to write a method and have the declaration automatically added, or vice versa, write a method declaration and get the implementation automatically added. And that's what we have, so let's have a look at these live. First, let's look at rename refactoring. Renaming something is a very useful operation, so we'll use this test app, which is a small but non-trivial real-world app which we publish on our GitHub, to demonstrate. You can rename anything, but here I'm going to rename the grid type because it's a key type used throughout the program. You can see when I open the dialog, it lists all the references it finds to grid, and there are checkboxes to control where it looks. Note that you can rename across an entire project group, not just one project, which is key. And also note that Visual Assist can find references in comments and strings. Refactoring is about code maintenance, and it's not good maintenance if your comments get out of date. So we can scroll through this and give a quick visual check what it will rename, looks good, and also ensure that we check the checkbox next to the comment it found so it will rename there. And when we click rename, it renames through the entire project and project group. Note when I go find that comment that it's renamed there too, which is unusual for any refactoring tool, but not for Visual Assist, because Visual Assist does things that are meant to be useful and go beyond what other tools provide. And of course, if I recompile, you can see the app still builds, a fundamental test and a very good one. Let's move on to the next refactoring, add include. In the slide earlier, we mentioned code completion and that it could complete for types that aren't even in the current unit yet. To demonstrate this, let's add a completely blank unit, and you can see that other than its own header, it has no other includes, and it does not know about key types. It does not know about C++ strings or vectors or maps, and does not know about even the types defined elsewhere in this program because we haven't included them. So let's write some code and we'll add two types, a system include like map, and one of our own apps types. We have code here that needs some include files added. Visual Assist works very tightly integrated to the symbol that your text cursor is in, which is worth remembering if you want to invoke functionality, that you need to put your cursor in the token that you want to do something with. For us, that's map. Let me put my text caret there, and then in the refactor main menu, you can see add include, and it tells us which header it's going to add, map. When I click that, it's added. Let me do the same now for grid. This time I'll use the editor context menu, and you can see again it tells us that for the grid type it's going to add a specific header. Now I have the two includes added at the top of my unit. Let's do this for a more complex case. Rather than a new blank unit, I'll go to some existing code. Now this unit is UE agnostic. It has no UE code at all. It doesn't know anything about drawing or buttons or anything, and we could include it into a VCL app or a command line app if we wanted. And I'll add a bit of code referring to a UE control, a T button. When I right-click and add include, you can see we'll add the include for fmx.stdcontrols.hpp. Now, there's a T button type in both FireMonkey and VCL. How does it know to use a FireMonkey header when we're adding an include in a file that has no FireMonkey present? The answer is that Visual Assist is aware of the framework you're using for your app and is able to know that you need the FireMonkey or VCL versions of a header. And this is the same for any other situation when it needs to resolve and find information about a type. And we've seen two things today. We've seen code completing types that the current code isn't even aware of, including with both types in our own project group, and the STL or any other headers that count as system headers, like the ones in Getit. And we've seen including the right include file for any type just by right-clicking it and selecting add include. Now let's move on to the two smaller code generation or refactoring operations, which also live in the refactor main menu and the editor context menu's refactor submenu. Let me add a method to the grid class. Now, normally I now need to go into the grid.cpp file and add the implementation, which is fine, but it's the kind of work that I should be able to automate. If I now right-click my new method, and remember that I have to click the name itself like everything else with Visual Assist, and select Rename Create Implementation, you can see Visual Assist goes ahead and creates a skeleton implementation for me. You can do the same in reverse and use Create Declaration if you create a method and want the declaration added. So those are the refactorings we've added to our initial Visual Assist integration. We have two large or major refactoring tools to rename any symbol and to add the include file for any type, and two smaller ones where you can automatically add a declaration or implementation. For the final set of features out of Code Insight, refactoring, and navigations, let's look at navigations. Navigation is another key strength of Visual Assist, and we have some really useful features here. Rather than have a lot of slides, I'm just going to jump straight into a demo, starting off with the small ones and finishing with my absolute favorite feature in Visual Assist. First, the smallest feature, but actually a feature that is one of the most highly voted requests we have for C++ Builder. A few minutes ago, we looked at automatically creating the implementation or declaration for a method, but it's also really useful to quickly jump between the implementation and declaration. This is a fast way to get between methods, and also just a fast way to get to the class header or a useful part of your code. In Delphi, you can do this via Control-Shift up or down arrow, and we've added this to C++ Builder now too. As you can see, I am toggling between the method we just added in the header in the CPP file entirely via the keyboard. Just as an aside, I've stressed that for Visual Assist you always need the editor cursor to be in the relevant symbol, not just nearby. This feature is an exception to the rule and will work when the cursor is in empty space in the method too. It doesn't have to be in the method name. There are also menu items for this because we think key functionality should be available in menus, not just hidden behind shortcuts. And you can find this in the search menu as Go to Definition and Go to Implementation. These menus are present for Delphi as well now too, which is why they don't have the Visual Assist tomato icon, even though for C++ they're implemented with Visual Assist. The menus let you specifically go to whichever one you want, but the Control-Shift up or down shortcut simply toggles. Let's move on to a major code understanding and navigation tool, Find References. Find References is a tool that lets you find where something in your code, like a class or method or anything, is used or referred to. In fact, Rename Refactoring uses this under the hood, because in order to rename everything, Rename has to know all the references to whatever it's renaming. And it's very useful for you, because Find References lets you find any code that uses the code you're looking at now. Let's try it. What parts of this app use the binary tree method? Right-click, Find, and Find References. Okay, that's not very many. Let's try something larger. What about the cell type? I can go to Search, Find References, and it will show me. You can see this type is used extensively throughout the app, and not only does it tell me every reference, but it tries to give a bit of information about the class or method where it's used on the left too, such as this one, where you can see the reference to cell is in the Aldus-Broder method. Of course, I can double-click or press Enter and go there. Find References is not just a code understanding tool, but a navigation tool too. We also have a menu item to find references in Unit. Find References by default looks in your project, and you can click a toolbar button to look in your entire project group. Find References in Unit is similar and just looks in the current unit, which is useful when you're trying to do what is effectively a local search and know you want something in your current code and there's no need to look through the entire app. Note that Find References is not a search. It's based on parsing your code and is a database query. In other words, it's not a text search. And that means that the references it returns are the actual real references in code. The next feature, and wow, there are a lot of features we're shipping, is Find Symbol. This lets you find any symbol that Visual Assist knows about, and this is not just symbols in your code directly, but all the headers your code uses and all the headers they use and so on. Let's invoke it. You can see in the title bar that it knows about 160,000 symbols, and you can search for any of them. I'll type get window, and you can see it updating live. That's very fast response. It's searching constantly as I type through over 160,000 symbols here. You can see it found many results, but selected the most likely, which is the Windows API method getWindow. And this is what I mean about Find Symbol finding anything and knows about the Windows headers, for example, among all the other headers available to it. If I search for something else like grid, you can see it shows the grid header, the macro in the header that's in my project, and a few lines below the grid class. Here I want to demonstrate some of the other search features. I can click a checkbox to search only for symbols in the project group rather than searching everything Visual Assist knows about. And you can see the results changed immediately to a much narrower set. I can also search for only classes, structs, and namespaces, and immediately it shows just the one matching result, the class grid. These are very powerful because Find Symbol will find anything, and these options help you filter down results. There are also search filters, so I can search for words that begin or start with a certain term. If I type MN, it gives me results containing column and columns. If I put a period at the end, MN dot, it means that I want results that end with MN, and you can see that only matches two symbols. I can also put a dot at the beginning to find only symbols that start with the search term. So just as a quick recap, Find References is to start with a symbol in your code and find references to where it's used, whereas Find Symbol is to find any symbol that exists anywhere. Next, let's have a quick look at GoToMember. This is a small but useful navigation which lists, and lets you navigate to, of course, all the member fields and properties and methods of a type. So if I put my cursor in the symbol, I'll use grid again, you can see that it lists every method and field in the grid type. But it's a bit smarter than that. If I put my cursor in this expression, image viewer arrow bitmap with my cursor inside bitmap and go search, go to member, it knows this part of the expression refers to a T bitmap, and it shows me the members there. In fact, I can even put my cursor in the assign method call, and it knows it's a call on the T bitmap type. And so when I click go to member, it will show me the members of T bitmap. And of course, you can search and filter and go to any of the members. Now, I've saved the best for last. There is one more menu that we have not looked at yet today, and it's my favorite. And that is this menu item, Go to Related. This is, in my personal opinion, the most amazing feature ever, and I have used it any number of times since we first got it integrated. Go to Related's job is to see what you clicked on and let you navigate to anything useful related to it. It is so useful, we've integrated this more closely than the normal main menu or editor context menu. RAD Studio has a feature where you can hold Control, and as you move your mouse, symbols turn into hyperlinks, and you can click them to go to their definition. And in C++ Builder 11.3 and before, we had that. In C++ Builder 12, control clicking on any symbol instead invokes Go to Related, because one of the related things is going to a definition that's still there, but you can go to a whole lot more. So while I can use the search or context menu Go to Related, for this demo I'm going to hold the Control key down and click on things. Let's start small, something basic, a namespace. This app has a namespace maze which is used in multiple areas, and you can see it used here in this method. If I control click on it to invoke Go to Related, I get a menu popping up, and this lists all of the definitions of the maze namespace. If I expand the menu, you can see everywhere that I have defined the namespace. And of course, click on to go there. Now this might give you a hint where this feature is going. Let me now click on a member variable named mpgrid. The menu pops up and I can go to the declaration. Great, that's where it's defined. But I can also go to the types of the variable through this types of symbol menu. And this variable is a unique pointer of grid. And you'll see Visual Assist knows that, and both are listed here and I can navigate to either. This means that you can find and navigate to the various types that make up a type, in that Visual Assist will allow you to separate the template specializations and navigate to each one. Even better, I can also invoke the GoToMember dialog for both this variable and even for the form that it's a member field of. You can start to see what we mean here by Go to Related. It picks up anything useful and lets you go there. But we are just getting started. One of the key things about object-oriented architecture, like C++, is polymorphic inheritance. So let's find a class that inherits from other classes, and in turn has other classes inheriting from it. A good example is tCustomButton in the FireMonkey framework. Of course, this works for any class at all, VCL classes, your classes, anything. If I control-click the type name, tCustomButton, we can go to the definition and go to a member. We can also go to the constructor, which is useful. But what's really neat is that you can find the ancestor classes for this type. Here, when I mouse over base classes, it shows all the ancestors. I can click to go to any of them. What's equally useful is that I can see the derived classes when I mouse over the derived classes submenu. Note the caret symbols that show how deeply nested the inheritance is. This lets you at a glance see what classes inherit from a type anywhere in your project group and go there. This works clicking any type, so even though I'm now at the tSpeedButton declaration, I have the type name tCustomButton on screen and I can control-click that to see the same menu. Or I can control-click any other type. What about tBasicAction here? You can see how it has 3 ancestors, but has quite a few derived types, and note again that you can see how derived they are by how indented they are. This is incredibly useful. It lets you navigate through the entire inheritance tree of your software, starting from any point in that tree up and down. But it doesn't stop there. What about virtual methods? Let's try tBasicAction, and I'll go to its constructor. Again, control-click to invoke goToRelated. There's a virtual update method, and if I control-click that, you can see that this time, because I clicked a method, instead of a derived type submenu, I have a derived symbol submenu. And expanding it, the update method is overridden by 6 descendant methods, and of course I can now go to any of them. This too is incredibly useful because a big part of object-oriented programming is dealing with or understanding what method is actually called, what overrides there are, what method implementations exist, and moving between all the related classes and methods. Now, Visual Assist is not just a simple integration into C++ Builder. It knows about C++ Builder-isms, like properties, and we haven't touched on that yet, but now's a good time. We just looked at virtual methods and seeing the ancestor method implementations and derived overrides. There's a method here that is dynamic, and that is an entirely custom kind of method that is effectively virtual but internally different in how it's called. But to be useful in C++ Builder, we had to teach Visual Assist that dynamic methods exist and what they are. And sure enough, if I control-click this dynamic method execute, you can see it lists the derived overrides of the method correctly. Let's look at properties too. If I control-click one of the properties, you can see that Visual Assist shows where the property has been redeclared in the descendant types. And of course, you can go to member, and the listing of members includes the properties, as well as the backing field and setter method. GoToRelated works on pretty much anything. You can even try it on header files. You can see what other files a header includes, and then even see what files the header is included by. And there's more. We're out of time, but when you install RAD Studio 12, just go around control-clicking on stuff and see what you get. So that's Visual Assist in C++ Builder and RAD Studio 12, an amazing initial integration. You have code completion. It's different to the past. Don't expect the same. It's new, different, it's fast, and heuristic. You have multiple refactorings. Rename any symbol, add the right include file for any type, and create method implementations and declarations. And then you have a whole heap of navigations, tools to help you understand the structure of your code and move swiftly around it. Find references, find symbol, toggling between the implementation and declaration, go to member, and goToRelated, which takes you to anything useful related to whatever you click on, to the declaration and constructor and base and derived types and base and derived virtuals, and I think is the most amazing feature ever. And it's all got C++ Builder extras. It understands code that uses things like properties. This is huge for your daily productivity, for moving around and understanding code. It's fast, speedy, contextual, and I think is one of the best things we've ever added to the product. I can't wait for you to try it, and don't forget that CBuilder and RAD Studio 12 are out right now. Let's move over to the other big news for C++ in RAD Studio 12. We've discussed before, both in a blog and a webinar, that we're upgrading our C++ compiler, and in fact, not just the compiler, but the entire toolchain. For the sake of time, I won't go into too much detail, but we're aiming at excellent tools such as a new linker, at using platform standards like the PDB debug format and the COF object file format, at multi-standard library and more, such as allowing new code optimizations that were not previously possible. We're using a lot of LLVM and related tools, and the toolchain is looking really exciting. It uses the universal C runtime for the C-level RTL, which is a standard Windows component. It uses a custom C++ runtime. And it uses LLVM's libc++ for the STL, which has great standards conformance. Redoing things like the custom C++ level runtime really emphasizes our approach of doing it right, where things like, for example, exception handling and SEH are fully reworked for excellent compatibility and correct behavior. We're even replacing the linker, which will be exciting for those of you with very large projects. And of course, all this is keeping everything that makes C++ Builder C++ Builder, such as supporting Delphi using things like properties and of course much more. This is available as a preview in RAD Studio 12. One of the big themes with this toolchain is doing it right, and that means taking our time, thus shipping a preview, not the final release. However, the preview is very exciting, and we expect many of you will want to test it out. For the build in the 12.0 release, the compiler is focused on pure C++. In other words, you can't yet create a VCL or FMX application in the build that we have today, although Delphi extensions like property are working. You can, however, test out the C++ tech that we're using, build using the command line, but you can debug within the IDE itself. Let me show you using some code I used for a webinar earlier this year, which measured the performance of C++ maps. This code was written with Visual C++, but I'm using it unaltered with the new Win64 toolchain, as you'd expect. For the sake of pointing it out, if I'd written it with C++ Builder, it should also work unaltered, as you'd expect. We're aiming at excellent compatibility, of course, with the previous C++ Builder, which goes unsaid, but also with other toolchains and general C++ code. I can build it on the command line. Here I'm building statically and emitting PDB debug info, mainly just for the sake of the demo. Note that the compiler is invoking the LD LVM linker. We aren't using ilink anymore. In the IDE, I can go to the Run menu and then use either Attach to Process if it's already running or Load Process, and select the modern Win64 LDB debugger for C++. Make sure you choose that, not the other C++ debugger. If I place a breakpoint, you can see it pausing. What's notable is that you'll see its CRT in the messages view, and you would see it loading the libc++ STL if I'd built dynamically, and it's loading PDB debug info. So that's the technical preview of the upgraded Clang toolchain. Command line building, but IDE debugging at this stage. It's completely reworked, using platform standards, capable and performant STL, and more. There's a large amount of work that's gone on under the hood to get us to this stage, and we think you'll find testing it out very exciting, especially if you've ever wanted to move away from ilink, use specific STL templates, or anything else where this new toolchain has a very strong emphasis on quality and being the absolute best it can be. And it is the best. We are approaching this with a strong focus on doing it right, and we're definitely looking forward to your feedback now and as we continue with it. Now let's have a look at what's new in the installer and IDE. RAD Studio 12 has a new UE for the Feature Manager, which we often used to call the Platform Manager, but it allows you to enable and install many features too, so Feature Manager it is. The old one had multiple pages, but this new one is a single window where you choose the languages you want to use, the platforms you want to support, and the extras you want on the right-hand side. Very simple. There's also much better error reporting, and while we hope there are never errors, this will make anything that happens much easier to solve. And of course, it's all built with standard VCL controls, uses VCL styles, and supports IDPI. A small but neat feature we've added in the IDE is a light form of syntax highlighting in the various windows that display code snippets, or display info about code in some other way. This includes the editor dropdowns, the structure view, watchers, and so forth. My favorite is the call stack. It really highlights the key information, as you can see on screen. And when our engineer checked it in and I first tested it out, I found that going back to 11.3 or turning it off felt like a real loss, which is a sign of a good feature. It's different syntax highlighting to in the editor. For example, on the call stack screen, you can see it renders the key method names as bold. I find that like all syntax highlighting, this one really helps make key areas of what I'm reading clear. And it's very useful for code in all the parts of the IDE where code is displayed that's not part of the code editor. Now to cover the next portion, over to Nunu for a few minutes.
Hello everyone, and thank you David for passing along the microphone. I'm very glad to be here today talking with all of you about RAD Studio 12.0. This is a very exciting release for us with a lot of news. And without any further ado, let's jump straight into our next new feature. This feature is a multi-device icon generator that allows us to generate icons and splash screens for all screen resolutions at once, this including the Android's adaptive icon, and all of it embedded within the IDE. And actually, in this case, to showcase this feature, I will do a live demo. So let's jump straight into RAD Studio, where all we need to do is to create a blank application, for example. And from here, go into Project, Options, and on the left, choose the Icons tab and click on the Artwork Generator button. However, since I want to create icons for all platforms at once, what I will do first is I will press in this drop down, click on All Configurations, and now click Artwork Generator. What this will do is allow me to, from one single image or from one single source, create the icons for all the available platforms. As you can see, we have several options. We can use an image or use text. We can change the background layer. We can change the shape of the icon. However, to give better results, we highly recommend you to use SVGs, so that's what I will be doing in this demo. So I'll just press Image, go into my Downloads folder, and choose a previous SVG that I chose. Click OK, and from here I'll show you something. We can change the scale. Let me put it back at 100%. We can choose if the background is solid or an image. In this case, I'll go into solid. We can change the colors also, for example. From here, I think the sky blue looks nice. And we can decide if it will be a rectangle, if it will slightly rounded. I'll go with rounded. Click Next. Now I'll have to choose the options for the Android adaptive icon. It looks pretty similar. So in this case, I will just decide to go Next also. On splash screens, here we have the options to choose the splash screen for several themes, for the dark and white themes. Here is for the white theme, and I will just adjust the scale a little bit so the icon doesn't look too small on the screen. And for example, for the dark mode, instead of sky blue, I will go with the black background. Now pressing Next and Finish. And that will be it. Now, if you go into the drop down and select any of the platforms, you will see that all of the icons were generated for every single platform. Another cool thing that this feature can do is, let's say that, for example, for Windows 32-bit platform, you wanted something different, you can actually go here and change the icons just for this platform exactly the same way as we did before, and it will only affect this platform and not the others, which I think is pretty cool. And that's it. I hope everyone enjoyed this new feature, and now I'll pass the microphone to David again. David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nuno. We spoke a lot earlier about Code Insight for C++ with Visual Assist, but Delphi definitely has some work this release too. In 12.0, Delphi LSP mainly focuses on quality and stability, and we even have a menu item to restart the server if you need, but we do have some smaller features. For example, code completion has always completed braces for methods, but now it completes square brackets for array types, including array properties. Similarly, we tweaked displaying colors in the completion list. Language keywords are included in completion, which is really useful, and code templates have improvements for where they appear. There's also a small but useful change where the various keys you can press that have an effect on code completion, such as which ones accept what's currently selected, are displayed on screen, and there may be more than you realized. We've also been working on auto-invocation of code completion. You might have noticed that some of the features I just mentioned are code completion features that existed in previous versions of Delphi, or that we've made behave more like previous versions of Delphi. And that's been a matter of us going through the history of the product and ensuring that we keep or re-implement the best parts. Auto-invocation is similar. In the past, before LSP, there was a setting so that you could pause typing and code completion would pop up after a short delay. This is back, though it's off by default, and we have some ideas for what to do with it in future releases too. The overall message here is that Delphi code completion is just working better. The IDE similarly has a lot of smaller features. One really useful one is that you can close a tab and then reopen it exactly as it was, including where the cursor was positioned, how far you were scrolled, what regions were open or collapsed, and so forth. The VCL designer now also shows custom colors when they're set for controls. The title bar supports the Windows 11 snap layouts, and searching lets you exclude folders with some good defaults for both Delphi and C++. There are a whole set of small but useful tweaks and features throughout the IDE that pay attention to productivity and doing what you expect. These small, useful features are because 12.0 has a heavy quality focus in the IDE. You might have picked up a theme of quality that certainly carries through here, and we've worked in areas such as multiple editor windows, or searching, where there were some odd behaviors in 11.3, various quirks of the form designer in high DPI mode, and more. One notable area is GDI resource usage, when you have a large number of components installed, where we cut the usage down by just under 2/3. Overall, the small things have a big focus, and quality has a big focus in this release. On the debugger side, one change we already noted is that the new Win64 debugger uses LDB15 in the PDB debug format, and that means you can use the IDE to debug anything with PDB. Some other changes are that messages from PA server show in the messages view. You can see the operating system thread handle, and something that's especially useful for mobile are improvements to when the debugger is not responding. It's often genuinely taking some time for an action, and we have a new wait button to let the IDE know it needs to keep waiting. That means you'll get a message sooner in case there really is a problem, but also that the delay grows each time you press wait, and this seems to work really well when the Apple debugger is just taking some time to do something. Finally, on the Tools API, we put a strong focus on the Tools API, which lets you build plugins and extensions for the IDE, and we add new APIs often to let you build whatever you want to build, and through that we've seen some pretty cool things. You can do almost anything with it that we can internally. For example, to go back a few releases, when we added Delphi LSP, we added a new asynchronous code completion API, which the LSP implementation was built on. And that means that if you ever wanted to implement code completion yourself, asynchronously and in a modern style, you could, using the same APIs that we used to build that. Similarly, we recently added comprehensive support for painting in the code editor, as well as getting information about the code editors and what's on screen. And in 12.0, we've continued to evolve that. You can now query more information about each line, such as if it has a blue dot or some other general line status, or each cell, which is each character effectively, such as if it's part of SyncEdit. This means that, if you wanted to, you could fully custom paint the editor, and it certainly means that any markup or additions you want to add can be done with access to full information. We also added new APIs for reading and writing to the editor. These are useful if you want to write a plugin that edits code in the editor, or read what's on screen, or read what's under the text cursor, or similar. Now we had, and still have, existing APIs to read and write the contents of the editor buffer, but they provided a file-like interface, so you had to read or write a lot to get to where you wanted. The new APIs are more low-level, and support random access to read or write a random line, and they are much faster. If you have plugins in mind that want to access the contents of the editor for any reason, we strongly recommend checking out the new APIs in version 12. Finally, there's just a bunch of miscellaneous improvements, things like getting the token at the current editor caret, or helping you set up the IDE title bar in your plugin windows, or giving access to the same message dialogues the IDE uses, a whole bunch of general quality, and more. As always, we really want to encourage you to experiment with the Tools API. Write some plugins and see what you can do. You can do anything. Now I'll hand over to Marco.
Thanks, David. This is Marco, and I'm going to guide you through the libraries that ship with RAD covering the changes we have done for 12.0. Let's start with FireMonkey. There is really a lot new in FireMonkey in this release. There is Skia graphic library support, and we'll get into that in more detail soon. There is a redesign of the style version of the input control, which serves as tedit and tmemo, depending if it's single or multiple lines. Android API 33 support for Delphi. New icons and splash screen designers we have already covered. Split views for mobile platforms, which is really a small but relevant feature, and a lot of other change in terms of features and quality. But let me start with Skia. So what is Skia? Why Skia? Skia is a very powerful library for 2D. It has high performance, good rendering, are unknown to us and to our libraries, and it's becoming the new foundation for FireMonkey. So the relevance of Skia is not just an additional feature, but is really a foundation work we are doing for the future of the library. Again, it's an open source library. It's backed by some big companies. It's the engine behind Flutter, but also Google Chrome, among many other products. And you can read on skia.org all of the relevant information about the library. How do we leverage Skia? We integrate in 12.0 out of the box, so everything is ready for you. Skia for Delphi, which is a cross-platform 2D library, which provides the ability of Skia, the APIs of Skia to Delphi. This is an open source project. We have worked extensively with the developers of the project, providing not only the core features of Skia for Delphi, but we are also adding additional capabilities on top of it, which are unique to RAD Studio 12.0. I could go through all of the features in Skia, all of the capabilities, the graphic formats. I won't do it. There's really too much to go into each of these elements, but the main point is this become automatically available as part of FireMonkey, so there isn't much you have to do to enable this large amount of extensions to your existing FireMonkey applications. Now, how do you use Skia in RAD Studio? There are multiple ways of doing it. It depends on what we're looking for. One option, which is probably not the most common one, I would expect, is just using the Skia API. The API is available through a unit. This is a small example. You can really just start coding against the Skia API. There are other and easier ways to leverage Skia in a RAD Studio application. The first and the easiest one is through specific UI controls that you can use and which provide extensive features that are not found in the core platform controls. A very good example is the label, which is depicted here. As you can see, the label is a bit more than a label. It has multiple line of text or multiple text elements. Each of them has its own coloring, capabilities, spacing. You can specify letter spacing and some very, very advanced text rendering elements. The third way to use Skia in RAD Studio is just to say, hey, use Skia for the styled UI controls. As you know, FireMonkey primarily uses style controls, turn on the global use Skia setting in FireMonkey. So it's one operation, one very simple thing you have to do in your code, and your application can move from the existing implementation in terms of rendering, which could be Metal, could be DirectX, could be OpenGL, towards using Skia with one global setting. It's really straightforward to move up an application from a different engine for rendering to Skia. There is another level of usage that's also interesting, which is codecs for image controls and image formats. In this case, there is really nothing you have to do. Skia enables these new image encodings for the existing VCL and FireMonkey image controls. So you don't need to use a specific the UI controls in Skia available for both platforms. And this is a bit more information about those controls: animated image, label, paintbox, animated paintbox, and SVG. Let me show an actual example of some of the additional controls beside the label that I was displaying earlier. The animated image control can display animations in a number of formats. You can see Lottie, you can see Telegram stickers, you can see animated GIF, and animated WebP. The paint box allows you to do freehand painting and allows you to display very advanced graphics, including, for example, gradients. And the SVG, as the name implies, allows you to display SVG images. And notice that these controls, the animated image, the image, and so forth, they are all available in VCL beside FireMonkey. So as a summary, Skia support in FireMonkey is available for both C++ Builder and Delphi. It's available for FireMonkey and also for VCL. It leverages the Skia for Delphi open source project, but the other thing I want to point out, it includes additional capabilities not in the open source project, which are very relevant. Vulkan support, it's a different graphic engine that is available on Android. So using Skia with Vulkan should provide a much better experience than just using OpenGLS. The Skia shading language for effects and filters is also available as a unique feature in the RStudio 12.0. The WebP encoder, which I showed earlier, and the ability to natively print for Windows and do PDF printing for all platforms. So you can take a form and render as a PDF, or take content and paint as you would paint on the screen on a PDF surface, and then generate a PDF file, which could be handy to support some sort of printing on mobile. Finally, we are also using Skia support for the new icon and splash wizard that was demonstrated earlier. Now, while Skia is a foundation for FireMonkey, it's not the only thing we did for the library in 12.0. We also did a significant rework of the tedit and tmemo controls. That's something that started in 11.3, but is now available across all platforms. We did a lot of change in FireMonkey to support this feature. There are new properties like auto select, character case. We improved the undo and redo with an improved undo manager component. Address a lot of positioning of the caret for edits on Windows, and implemented a lot of additional features. Same for iOS. We did some further improvements there for the tedit, and for Android even more, specifically with the management of the cursor and the position, the proper rendering for the caret point, and support for gestures. Beside Skia and the tedit control, there is further work done in FireMonkey. I won't even go through each of these items in detail, but they are relevant. They help us improving the quality and the library quite a bit. What I want to point out is the Universal T-Font Manager, universal meaning all platforms, and also, in particular, the ability to do split views or split screen on mobile platforms. So what we enable is the ability to have a FireMonkey application taking only a portion of the screen, not the entire screen. This is an example of a phone with a FireMonkey application and the browser. And also the ability at runtime to resize the form and have the proper layout recalculated and updated, similarly to what happens on desktop, where you generally are able to resize a form. That is all for FireMonkey, and it is a lot. Now let's focus on the VCL library. We've done a lot of work also in VCL. We have reworked the MDI architecture. This was a massive effort, way more than it seems from the outside, because on the outside we are just making MDI work. It's a significant effort that we did to take care of a number of cases where the underlying Windows platform support for MDI is fairly broken, specifically when you move to a high DPI screen. The idea was simply try to make sure that if you have existing MDI applications, and I know a lot of our customers have existing large MDI applications, we're offering to this application the ability to be rebuilt in RStudio 12 and work much better on high DPI, and also work very nicely, actually even better than on high DPI, when using high DPI and VCL styles. And the reason is because we take even more control of the non-client area when using styles, so we can fix all of the scenarios. Here you can see an MDI application running. It's actually a very simple, straightforward one, but it gives you an idea of it running with styles. In this page instead, you can see the differences between application. This is a very simple test that we created, and what you can see in 11.3 is the icons in the title bar of the MDI window are not painted correctly. They are extremely small, again because this is high DPI, and these are painted by the operating system. So what we did, and you can see it on the right, is we took over painting from the operating system, and now we are painting the icons at the size they should be. So this is just one of the examples, but there are many more. Another example is in the version with styles. Below the blue screen, it shows a minimized form. Minimized forms in MDI at the platform level are calculated in a completely wrong size. We have been able to improve significantly the rendering of the MDI forms. We also updated the wizard. The wizard allows you to generate a new MDI application that works significantly better. And the wizard also showcases another feature, which is the ability to use tabs. Let me explain this a little more. MDI is a very old-fashioned UI. I know a lot of customers still use it. Their customers want to use it. They're used to it for 20 years. Why change? Rather than changing and getting rid of MDI, what we are recommending is not only to adapt MDI with these new cleanup features, but also move towards a tab architecture. And this can be done by mixing MDI and tabs. So this is truly an MDI application, but what it adds is a tab component that is automatically displaying a tab for each of the active windows. This is a sort of a hybrid scenario, mixing MDI and a tab architecture. Of course, what you can aim for over time is get rid of the separate resizable windows within the tabs and go for child windows that take the full screen, and so move towards a full tab architecture. And we are making it much easier to build a tab architecture with this new T-form tabs bar control. It hosts child controls. It creates a modern-looking tab-like interface. It's something a lot of developers had already implemented on their own, but now it is out of the box in VCL, easily available, very flexible, powerful, and easy to customize because it's based on a very clean and robust underlying architecture, including this iForm Visual Manager interface that is what manages the underlying set of child windows. Let me go quickly through a demo of building an MDI application using the wizard. I just go to that page. The wizard has no additional requests or options. It's only going to ask you for a folder where to put the generated files. Select one, and you will get a full working application, although very simple. This is the application that was generated with an action list, action manager, image collection, and modern UI style and lookup, plus the new form tabs bar component. Let's run it. And as you can see, we can create multiple child forms. They automatically are listed here. If you minimize one of the forms, it is hidden to obtain a nicer graphic. That was the default. The platform does by default, and you can see that the matching element here is grayed out. Of course, you can close items from here. You can reposition the sequence. The selected item gets up front, and by clicking on the disabled or hidden form, it's displayed again on screen. That might not sound completely different from what was available in the past, and it is still based on the core underlying MDI architecture provided by Windows, but the change to VCL in this area has been really extensive. And for example, what you can do now, if you have an application with two forms, you can just add one form as a parent of another one, of the one we're creating dynamically here. And the net effect is quite interesting because the form will be created in the context of the hosting form or the parent form with a full resizable and working border. This is not MDI. This is purely form nesting, which is a brand new feature in VCL for the RStudio 12 release. While this improved MDI and child window support is the most relevant feature in VCL in 12.0, there is actually a lot more. One new feature is the way tFont scales. We have reworked the tFont class so that the size property of the font adapts to the DPI. This is different from the past, where size was remaining the same and then the painting code was adapting to the DPI. We have also added a new enumerator for tControl. An enumerator allows you to do a for-in loop rather than on the component, which has been for a long time in the product. Now you can enumerate child controls navigating through the child hierarchy. There are a lot of different filters you can use to determine if you only want to enumerate the enabled, visible, disabled controls, and also the ability to have a custom event handler to determine if a control should be part of the list being enumerated, depending on its status in a totally custom way. We have added tile view support to the T-list view. We have improved the number box control. We have improved the control list control, which is also used in the new installer and in the welcome page. We have added improvements to the title bar control, so it has support for snap layouts. That includes the RStudio IDE itself. The image and image collections have a way to disable the GDI handles if an image is not currently in use. That can save a lot of the GDI resources, which is still a scarce resource in Windows. We have added new activity indicator types, which you can see here. Ability to show a form in the taskbar independently on the form status. Previously, the library was determining whether a form was in the taskbar. Now you can have full direct control of it. Windows 11 specific features like rounded corners and enable immersive dark mode are also exposed at the form level. Finally, there is a lot of work on double buffering. That's a bit more complicated than I can cover here, so I'm going to skip any of the details. And that's all about VCL. Let me move now to data, including FARDAC, web technologies, and so forth. First, we have created a new JSON data binding wizard for Delphi. This is specifically for Delphi. The idea is that rather than mapping JSON to tJSON classes, tJSON value, tJSON object, tJSON array, and so forth, you want to improve your code by mapping JSON data structure to actual classes in your application. So what we've built is a wizard that can take an existing JSON text and generate the objects to map to, and generate the mapping code using one of two alternative options that are available in our libraries. One is the REST JSON mapping layer, and the other is the system JSON serializers. Long story short, you can go through this wizard, simply configure if you want the fields to be mapped to properties, to fields, which format, how you handle array types, and so forth. You can, of course, map to your own custom data types if you want. And what you get at the end is a bunch of classes which can be used directly to map the code to JSON. As an example of the JSON wizard, I've taken this JSON, which is actually coming from json.org. I've used it in the wizard to generate matching JSON classes that you can see here for each of the data structures in that JSON. This, again, is fully generated code with the window object, t-image, t-text, and other objects inside it. Not only it has the structure of the code, but it also offers at the higher level some memory management code. So as you're creating the topmost object, it is going to create and destroy the required sub-objects for you. That means that the code that you use to read this JSON in memory into a set of objects, not tJSON data structures, is 2 lines. This is all you need to say that you want to use the JSON serializer library and create a my object based on the JSON mapper from the text of the memo. And then at this point we can read some of the elements of this data structure. Again, here we're just using pure Pascal code, accesses to object and sub-objects rather than having to use JSON-based data access. If we run it, you can see this works, and you can actually see this is live, because if I change the JSON, re-import it, recreate the object, now I'm getting the modified text. The next thing I want to cover is a bit of a security-focused enhancements we have done to FireDuck. The idea, of course, is not to make applications magically secure. To have a secure application, you need to apply best practices. You need to follow a lot of good approaches in development. There's no shortcut to it. But FireDuck is providing in 12.0 some options that can help improve an application security. Primarily trying to disable side effects in SQL execution and make it more difficult to inject something nasty into your SQL code. This is done through a security options property, which has the ability to restrict the SQL operations a query can perform. For example, a query can only do select, cannot do insert or updates. This allows having multiple commands chained in a single SQL execute operation. That depends on the underlying database. If the database supports it, we are exposing the feature. Preventing the ability to change the SQL of a SQL query at runtime, and making sure that an insert or update only affects one record and fail if it ends up updating more than one record. In general terms, in the data space, we have also added improvements to JSON streaming. We did some of them because of the JSON mapping wizard. We've added a brand new feature in FireDuck, which is support for query by example. Query by example is a very powerful way that lets use data-aware UI controls that, rather than displaying data or being an input mechanism for your users, they allow your user to specify filters like more than 10 or it should be like this name and so forth. You can just type your rules into the UI controls and FireDuck will create matching SQL statements for you. We've added IB Lite and IB2Go for a simulator, improved a number of small things in the system, and moved the SQLite version we support to an updated release. Notice though that SQLite 3.42 does not support the old FireDuck encryption. If you want to use FireDuck encryption, you need to rely on the old version of SQLite, which is also available. Third option, we support SQLite EE, which is the paid encrypted version of SQLite. Of course, before going through paid for SQLite with encryption, we recommend you have a look to IB2Go, which not only is available freely on mobile if you're an enterprise, but it has a yearly subscription to deploy on all platforms, which is at a price point similar to the SQLite encryption. Now, one small thing we've done on RAD server is enable a feature called squids. Squids are a version of IDs that are based on a sequence of letters rather than something that might end up being a specific element in the database structure. For example, by default, if you don't customize anything and you display a customer table, you end up with URLs or REST endpoints like customer / and then the physical customer ID into the database. It's much better to abstract that into symbolic representation. And we've done it in a way that is almost a standard, so it could work across programming languages. But we've done it in a way that you have the client code that understands how to transform this ID into the URL, into the squid, and at the server side, the ability to intercept the squid and transform it back into the parameter that needs to be passed to your query. Couple of more things on HTTP REST. We have done a lot of smaller change, nothing huge, but a lot of very small significant change. What I want to point out too is curl support. We had it on Linux because that is the standard platform way to do HTTP client requests. Now you can use curl for the HTTP client library also on Windows and macOS. Finally, on RAD server, beside the squids, we have Improve the performance by embedding FastMM5. That's part of the RAD server implementation itself, not something you can use directly without an extra license. Paging, flexibility, and session authentication improvements. That is a lot we've done in the libraries, but that's not everything. We've also done a few changes in the Delphi language and in the core runtime library. First, let me recap the platforms that we support in Delphi. Support Android 14 down to 10, iOS 16 and 17. However, at this point in time, there's no debugging support on iOS 17 device. You can bypass it by using the simulator as target. Support from macOS Sonoma, Windows 11 up to the latest versions, and several other older versions of Windows and Windows Server and Linux platforms. Now, what we've done in Delphi as a language is we've extended string literals, so they're not limited to 255 characters anymore. You can have a very long string, and that's going to work fine. But more relevant, we have introduced the concept of multi-line string literal. So you can have a single string literal without having to do quote plus and then a new quote in the new line. You can just start a string literal with a triple quote, then copy in a portion of text, JSON, SQL, XML, or anything you want, and then close it with a matching triple quotes. This is very handy because in the past it was fairly annoying to copy and paste text into a string hard-coded in the language. There is a new text block compiler directive that can even allow you to control the line breaks, so whether each of those lines are separated by carriage return line feed, only one of them, or whatever is native to the platform you are compiling to. So your string on Windows would have a different termination for each line than the same string compiled for macOS. One way to see the effect of the text block directive for multi-line strings is to read the length of the actual string that is being created in memory. When you're using carriage return and line feed, which is the default on Windows, you get more elements in your string than if you're using only carriage return. The string is the same, but the difference in the new line management causes a difference in the length of the string itself. Linux. A few more things we've done to the Delphi language. One, we've introduced for the first time the concept of a weak type alias, and that is done for native int. So native int used to be a separate type that was floating, so it was behaving differently on 32-bit and 64-bit platforms. Now native int keeps behaving the same, but it's weak alias, meaning you cannot separate it as a way to overload a data type. You cannot overload a function with int and native int because native int is not a fully distinguished type from integer. It is a change that might cause a little bit of trouble if you have existing applications that were mixing native int, integer, and int64, but it's going to help having cleaner code on 32-bit, 64-bit platforms, and also it helped us clean up the RTL support for Win64. In addition, we have improved not a number comparison following the rules of IEEE, and improved warning for generic classes which were not matching the non-generic counterpart in the past. Small last thing, but quite handy, we are introducing a new feature to generate a file with all of the unit dependency, whether it's interface-based unit dependency, which are depicted here with the strong line, or an implementation-based unit dependency, which are depicted with the dash line. So the idea is you add this flag into your compilation, you get a file. What you can do with that file? It's a graph width file, so you can use a tool to generate the user interface like here. It can get very complicated for a large application, of course, but given it's a file with text, very simple to parse, you can also build extra tooling on top of it to simply figure out what might be wrong in your application architecture. And specifically, the goal is help people find circular unit references which are causing a lot of strain on the compiler in terms of compilation performance, which reflects also in the code completion side of things. The recommendation is to try to identify circular unit references and try to remove them when possible to have a cleaner architecture and also to have a faster. Very relevant is the support for Android API level 33. This has been required since a few months ago for Google Store and is becoming fully required this month, November. We are providing the full support of the API and a number of changes to improve how FireMonkey applications adapt to Android for the latest versions of the operating system and its improved security model, its improved storage model, and change to users permissions and so forth. So there are a number of changes for the Android platform, fairly extensive, that go beyond merely supporting the API level, but goes into improving the integration with the most recent versions of the Android operating system. We've also done something new on the Windows platform. Microsoft has finally provided metadata for the entire Windows API. It used to be that the only interface of the Windows API was header files, C language header files, that you could parse to generate the matching Delphi source code. But they did require a lot of manual tweaking, manual change. They were not clean at the source and consistent, so it was always difficult for us to have a complete mapping of the Windows API. Now with this metadata, we have modified one internal tool and we use it to generate Pascal files for the entire Windows API. What we are generating is 300 units. It's 41 megabytes of Delphi source code, and that's headers only. It's declarations only. That gives you the size and the relevance of this change. We are expecting to have really the entire classic Windows API available, and notice this is called Win32, but it works both on 32-bit and 64-bit. It's available in Gedit because it's a huge download and not everyone is going to need it, so we decided to go for a separate download. At the same time, we've refreshed the WinRT API to a more recent version than what we had in RAD Studio 11, and the API behind the WebView 2 control, which has also been extended with a number of settings that are made available at the T-Edge browser level in VCL, and some of them are also available to the T-Web browser control in FireMonkey. More features becoming available in WebView 2, and we are exposing those features in new versions of our product for T-Edge browser. Another big change is to floating point exceptions. We are disabling floating point exceptions on all platforms. This used to be a sort of mismatch between platforms other than Windows, but at times even on Windows, and what the Delphi RTL used to require and expect. You had to disable the floating point model every time you are calling given portions of the Windows API, or a lot of time when we're interacting with macOS or Linux. So we have decided to completely change the floating point exception model. This is a big change. We know it has potential ramifications on your code because you might be expect an exception that's not being triggered anymore. You can restore the old behavior calling system.math setExceptionMath. If you want to keep the old behavior, you can do it. We recommend trying to move to the new model. That's all we've done in terms of features and improvements in the product, and you see it's a lot. It's really a huge release, and we've also done a lot in terms of quality that probably doesn't show fully in this slides deck, but what I wanted to highlight here is the areas where we've done quality. It's almost everywhere, but in RAD Studio 12 we're really providing a large number of fixes. We have addressed with the fix over 1,000 issues reported by customers on Quality Portal, whether it's bug reports or feature requests. Including internal reports, we are almost close to 2,000 issues fixed. This doesn't include duplicates or issues that no longer apply. So if you take the overall number of Quality Portal issues we are thinking we should be able to close in the next few days, that's over 1,200 issues reported by customers that we have resolved with a fix or with some other resolutions, including duplicates or including issues that no longer apply because we have implemented the same feature differently. There are a lot of new features in RStudio 12. There are game changers in terms of C++, FireMonkey, and other areas. But there is also a lot of focus on quality because we know quality matters to our customers, and we've put a lot of time and effort into providing a quality release.
Okay, we're about to go into the Q&A session. Just before we do, though, because I just wanted to run through 2 or 3 things that often come up during the Q&A, so I just wanted to knock them on the head before we get there. First off, all of the questions about where do I, is the trial version updated? Where can I get hold of that? Where can I get more information on each of these features, all that kind of stuff? We've written a post up on our website. Either you can scan the QR code or the short link above it will get you there to take you through all of the, all of those kind of sorts of questions. Yeah. I'm going to assume that anyone who wanted to scan that probably has. So the next one is also about people who are already under update subscription. Obviously, part of update subscription, you can get access to RStudio 12 already if you haven't grabbed it already. However, sometimes people go to do that and they can't remember where their serial number is, or they can't remember, or the download process has changed since last time they did it. They can't find their way to do it. This article takes you through all of that: how to figure out what your serial number is, where to log in to get hold of it, where to download the installer from, all of that kind of stuff. Yep. So if you've got those sorts of questions, here's a link to something that will sort that out for you. Lastly, if you're not currently on update subscription and you are wanting to get onto the latest version and get onto update subscription, we've got a sale going on through till the end of the year. So if you're interested in finding out about that, 30% off, that QR code that I've got on the screen will take you to the details of that, or you can just email us through afterwards and we'll sort it out for you. Okay, so that's all of that stuff that I wanted to show. So what we might do now, I'll just maybe turn the cameras back on. We might go through some of the questions that we've received during the session. And if at this point, if you want to add, if you've got questions that you didn't put into the questions pane during the webinar, go ahead and do it now, and we can react live. But until they come in, a couple of questions that we have had during it. Possibly the first one, which I think reflects the fact that maybe Delphi guys aren't used to C++ builder guys getting features first. There was a lot of response to the Visual Assist support in C++ Builder. Lots of questions about when are we going to have it in Delphi. So David, let's deal with that one first cab off the rank.
Yeah, I was expecting that, and this is a pretty consistent question we've got in all the webinars. I remember saying at the beginning of the intro, because I knew there was going to be a C++ section before we really got into stuff with Delphi. I remember saying in the intro that if you use Delphi to stay tuned through that, and there's a good reason, just because it's so interesting to so many people. Yeah, so Visual Assist already supports C++, and that's why we put in for C++ Builder first. Yeah, because it really helps the integration, it already supports the language. But Visual Assist has technology that allows it to work with multiple languages. It currently works with C++ and C#. It used to work with VB in the distant past. So it's very plausible for us to add Delphi to it as well in future. Our strategy is basically let's get it in for C++ Builder, get it integrated into the IDE. This is our first version as well, so we'll be updating it over the next couple of releases in general, since it's a huge product and we want to keep on adding more things. and look at extending the language. So yeah, C++ first, looking at what we can do for Delphi.
Okay. I'm sort of jumping around a little bit here. One other question that came up towards the end there was around, Marco mentioned the GraphViz support, and I guess, I mean, the GraphViz support looked impressive, but he mentioned a couple of times about, circular unit references can put stress on the compiler. Are you in a position to talk maybe a bit to that? I didn't really realize that. What does that mean?
Sure. So one of the things with Delphi is, you have your two users clauses, interface and implementation, and it's very easy to create sort of dependency loops where unit A uses unit B, which uses unit C, which uses unit D, which uses unit A. And that can, if you do that directly, you will get a compiler error. You're probably familiar with that, but you can create loops because of the two different users clauses. And that does make things complicated for the compiler, because it has to trace through these loops and dependencies in order to obviously create its information and so forth. And the problem is that as you extend dependencies, you can get a slowdown that grows very fast. So we have internal test cases where we'll have loops of hundreds of units that you're adding a single more one to go from 100 to 101 will double the compilation speed. And then you go to 102 and it'll double again. And as developers, we're all familiar with this kind of complexity. It's exactly what we want to avoid. But that is the situation with circular unit references. Obviously, we're working on trying to resolve that. But that's the reason why you will want to analyze your units. And the way to solve that is to break the loop by introducing a unit that holds the types that you need, that instead of having a circle, you can have sort of two branches that both point at that unit. Now, you might happen to know your code and be able to figure out what types to put in that unit or something like that, but it's a complex problem. It's not always easy to figure out. And so that's where the GraphViz export comes in, because it will export exactly what the unit dependency is, and you'll be able to, it's an open format, so you can many tools that will display that format, and you can use it and open it and see what's going on, and then resolve the problem. And Delphi is normally very fast to compile, but if you have something that takes even, let's say, 20 seconds, which is slow for Delphi, for big projects even, very likely you have something going on, and would be well worth just running your projects with this tool just to do an analysis and see if there's anything that you might be completely unaware is even there. If you happen to fix, you may end up having a really big impact on your compile speeds without even having realized that you might have a problem.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, if it's the kind of thing that you kind of care about as soon as you've got a big application. If your application is compiling quickly, then who cares? Move on with your life. But as soon as you find yourself, waiting for it, then that's probably the moment where the value of this kind of kicks in. Okay.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Actually, that's just made me. That's almost a direct pass to another question that's come in. But before we get to that one, a lot of work seems to have gone into Skia integration in this release. Now, maybe this is an obvious question and I'm exposing my Skia ignorance, but given that Skia is a cross-platform library, so obviously makes sense that it works for FMX. I was a bit surprised to see all the VCL sort of additions in there. So is there value in using Skia inside VCL, or is it really mostly an FMX thing?
Oh no, there's a lot of value there. I mean, the reason that we added it, even for FineMonkey, is just that it's an excellent graphics backend. and it's very fast and very performant and produces really good quality output, visually in terms of the image and how it renders. That's why it's used by technology like Chrome and Flutter and other technologies. So it makes a lot of sense for FireMonkey, but VCL as well, because the huge number of VCL developers out there, and high quality, really performant graphics rendering is really important for everyone, including on Windows. So we have some demos on GitHub, by the way. So just go to GitHub/Embarcadero, and there are Skier demos there for both Delphi and C++, and they include VCL demos. And you can do things like run shaders inside your app that have obviously incredibly fast performance for what's rendering. There's a neat little demo there where you have a shader that just follows the mouse, sort of create a gradient around the mouse, incredibly responsive, far more responsive than you can get with plain GDI. And look, for VCL, we added direct 2D canvas a few years ago, which is occasionally used, but I don't think many people know about. But that was for a similar reason, to give access to sort of high quality graphics rendering for VCL apps. But I think Skier is a more accessible way to do it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose it depends on your application, but many people find that having, especially today, apps are really getting visually beautiful.
Yeah.
Skier is a wonderful way to really easily make that happen in your app, regardless of whether it's FireMonkey or VCL.
Yeah, we actually end up doing a lot of projects for people where we're updating their older apps, and it's surprising how often one of the biggest priorities for them is just the appearance. That they're getting a lot of pushback from their customers on having an app that hasn't really changed. Still looks like a 1990s app or an early 2000s window app. So sometimes I find myself scoffing at appearance stuff because it's just appearance. It's not the important stuff, but it actually kind of is.
Yeah, it's very true. People do judge by appearances, and it can have a big impact that you might not even realize is there until you address it and realize that people are reacting to your software differently.
Yeah. So actually, here's one that follows on from Skier. Jared's asking the question about whether a FireMonkey container supports Skier, and this one's specifically directed at you, David.
Oh, right. The FireMonkey container is a little bit of source code I wrote years before I joined Embarcadero, because I was trying to sort of mix FireMonkey into VCL apps. It is completely unsupported, like it's a real hack, and I really don't recommend it. But I haven't tested it with Skier. I see no reason why it wouldn't work. But I do have to point out that it's a pretty hacky bit of code, so it's definitely not official, and not something I'd really want to recommend wearing an Embarcadero official hat.
But taking that hat off, you don't see why it wouldn't work.
I haven't tested it, but I know of no reason why it wouldn't work.
Okay, good. All right, so Jared, hopefully that gives you the incentive to go and try it.
I mean, it's pretty cool to know it's used. Slightly scary, but cool to know. So thanks for the question.
All right. So the question that I thought of after you were talking about the graph viz and the circular references and the stress that putting on the compiler. So one of the questions that came up with this, and we've heard it from in other places, is around the 64-bit IDE. So what's the expectation and the story on that one?
Right. Yeah. No. Look. That's on the way. I just want to say I'm not going to name a particular release or anything here, because we have very strong policies about saying something before it's actually GA'd and released. But we know that the 64-bit IDE is of key interest. We have an internal build that's 64-bit and have had for some time. But it's not ready even for beta status. But I can tell you it's in development. It won't come in 12.1. But I would stay tuned over time for that. It's definitely something we want to get out there. When we do, what we anticipate, and again, I'm just going to hand wave as this is our current thinking, no promises, that kind of thing. But we would most likely ship it as sort of like a beta or preview version, so you could use it in parallel to the 32-bit one. We wouldn't switch from 32 to 64 in one release. We would have, sort of a set of both of them available for some time. It's also very likely that a 64-bit build of the IDE will do things like not support debugging 32-bit apps. But only support debugging 64-bit apps or restrictions like that. Now we might, resolve that over, subsequent releases of 64-bit IDE, but that's the kind of thing I would anticipate coming in a sort of beta or preview version of a 64-bit one. So I can't say when that's coming, but in development internally we want it, and I expect our plan would be some kind of preview that we hope would be very usable, but just with restrictions like that.
Okay. Well, I think, the key takeaway, I think that's possibly the first time I've heard an Embarcadero person say that it exists and you've got an internal version that is being played with. And you did say not in 12.1, so
No.
my takeaway from that is it's 12.2.
I wouldn't even read that into it. I mean, there's a reason we haven't even put it into the beta program yet, because it's not ready.
Sure.
We have things like the code editor and form designer and stuff working, but there's a lot of things like look, the main one is compiler integration, where we have our compilers loaded as DLLs into the IDE. That means we need 64-bit builds of those, for example. So there's work to be done, and it's doable but significant work before we can get to a preview stage to ship. But I can clearly tell you, we have an internal build. It'll come at some point. I cannot speak more accurately than that, I'm afraid.
Sure. I mean, just for the record, to be clear, I was being flippant with that 12.2 comment, just for everyone listening. I'd hate for that to be the takeaway from this webinar. I guess it does give you an appreciation for the complexities of the IDE, though. I guess as opposed to a database application or whatever, moving to 64-bit. Loading compilers as DLLs, integrating into the debugger, all those sorts of things. It's not as straightforward as flipping the platform over and doing a rebuild.
No, although it was quite amazing how straightforward a lot of them was. I mean, the technical things like that are definitely complex. The vast majority of the IDE, though, when we started on that work, was able to be converted very quickly, and I think it really speaks to the power of Delphi and good compiler warnings if you have any 64-bit issues, and the code base goes back to Delphi 1, so there were a few things like that which we were actually able to find and fix very quickly. So I think we have a lot of customers who've done their own conversion of 32 to 64-bit, and obviously there's work and the stuff you need to be aware of, usually around pointer sizes and casting and things like that, but it can often be surprising just how fast you can just power through and do a conversion like that.
Yeah. One other, and then I'll deal with a question that just came in. One other, during, I can't remember whose it was, maybe Marco's session, he mentioned QBE, query by example, which he kind of rolled past fairly quickly, but I think that has a lot of potential in it. I can remember years ago when we were engaged to replace an old Paradox application with a Delphi application. Most of it was easy, but the piece that we got the biggest rebellion from the users was taking away query by example. Like that was like the feature that stopped them from moving to the new version. So I'm kind of pleased to see that it's in there, and I understand it's in there for VCL and FireMonkey.
Yes, look, I believe so, and look, this is something Marco looked after, so I just have to tell you what I understand. But as far as I know, it's there for VCL and FireMonkey, and as part of FireDAC, which is fairly, platform agnostic. And it's an excellent feature. I'm really glad to see it there.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience, non-technical users react to it really positively, just as a way to slice and dice their data without having to learn how to write a query or anything like that. Okay, and then it's probably unusual to have got this far into a webinar in 2023 without anyone mentioning AI. But Jared's just asked a question, and it's come up before, about integration of large language models or ChatGPT or sort of Copilot-like functionality into RAD Studio.
Yeah, definitely strong interest for very obvious reasons. It's incredibly useful. Nothing we can announce right now, but I think you can assume that we have people looking into it. It's definitely of strong interest.
Right.
I wish I could tell you something more solid, but not currently.
Okay.
But a couple of notes on that. We have a lot of people in the community who are interested in it as well. There's there are several projects on Get actually that are around AI and putting AI into the IDE, and I think they're worth checking out. And also, it reminds me that during 12.0, we actually added some specific support to our REST code for interacting with AIs. That's because playing around with AIs internally. One of the things there is that when you have a chat AI, you will they all communicate via REST basically. So very simple to address and use. It just takes minutes to connect to OpenAI, for example, with our REST components. But previously with REST responses, you would get a long JSON string, but our REST response would not come back until that JSON was complete, which makes sense. But chat AIs often return, word by word or token by token rather. And if you use them online, you'll see them sort of come in word by word. And so we added support for that into our REST code. So you can get these sort of partial and growing responses back from REST. So if you want to interact with an AI, then you can actually easily build and mimic the same sort of web UI that you see with the code that we have in our REST components in version 12.
Okay. Good. Cool.
So that was a little off topic for that, but I think it was quite neat because and also it demonstrates that we're aware of what AI is doing. So I have my own personal apps, for example, that interact with AIs, and I write them in Delphi and CBuilder and use our components.
Okay. Cool. I'm just scanning through the questions to see any that we haven't sort of dealt with. Hang on, one's just come in at the bottom from Scott. Around either around WebAssembly or building complex web applications with Delphi, if not WebAssembly.
Yeah, look, we definitely need to do something in this space. We don't have anything we can announce currently. But there's a lot of internal discussion about the direction to go in with web. Whether that should be WebAssembly or something else. WebAssembly looked really promising, but there are interesting technical issues with it that I think make it a little weaker than it would appear as an option. But we haven't made a decision, so there's nothing we can announce in that direction. But I think the best answer is yes, we know web is a thing. So yeah, looking into it internally.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, can you think of any other questions you saw come in that I haven't called out?
I think there was one about floating point.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Floating point exception. Yeah.
And I have to admit on this one, Marco's point about floating point exceptions and that they've been, did I get this right? They've been disabled now. So maybe it's just me, but what does this mean?
Well, first of all, if you want, it can mean absolutely nothing because you can just turn it back to the old behavior. So
Okay.
it's good to get that up front because I mean, we always try to keep backwards compatibility. Yes, it's very easy if you upgrade 12 to. There's a single method call. I actually have this written down somewhere because I can never remember the name. System.math.setExceptionMask, and you can use that just to set the 11.3 and earlier behavior. But
Okay.
what changed? Look, for years, and I remember this going back to the 90s, Delphi had a different set of floating point exception masks than Windows did. And so if you did things like play around with OpenGL, you would have to set a particular floating point mask, and that changed the behavior of the math when something odd happened. Would it raise an exception or not? You can think of divide by zero or math overflows or other sort of numerical situations. And same issues. Sometimes you would have, let's say, an open dialog which hosted Explorer, but Explorer would load its various COM extensions or DLL extensions, and they'd be written assuming a different floating point mask, so you might get exceptions, or you might come back from a dialog and find that your math behavior had changed because some external code you had loaded had changed the exception pattern and you wouldn't realize. And that has impact because your code will behave differently when there are different math problems, basically, and you might not even realize. And then with mobile happened over the past few years. So sorry, I should explain what I just said by saying that all of that comes from historically Delphi having different behavior than the Windows platform standard, which is to ignore floating point exceptions. So that math issues don't raise floating point exceptions. But then mobile happened, and it was completely standard there for that to be off, and it was off by default from the very beginning. So you'd have a FireMonkey app running on iOS, for example, and you would not get floating point exceptions when odd math circumstances happened. And that's because that's the way it always was. And so we started matching the platform. And that meant that the same code and the same apps would now behave differently on Windows to mobile as well. So we really needed to resolve this, and the way to resolve it is to follow the platform conventions, to do what everyone else is doing because it's consistent and you don't get unexpected behavior. And so that's what we've done in version 12. In version 12 on Windows, floating point exception masks are set to be turned off by default. So if you have something like a floating point overflow, then you won't get an exception raised for that by default. And that is a change since 11.3. Now you can turn that back on again. As I mentioned, system.math.setExceptionMask can be used. You can just put that very early in your app startup in the DPR file and get the previous behavior. But there's good value in having your code behave the same way as code written in every other language that runs on Windows. So it's well worth considering just checking what your code does and ensuring that it works with that pattern.
I mean that all makes.
So sorry about that, but I hope it was clear.
Well, no, like I kind of understood everything you said, but I think the part that I struggle with is why everyone else ignores floating point exceptions. Like I feel like as Delphi developers, we've been trained over the years as don't ignore exceptions. But here we're saying we're going to start ignoring this whole category of exceptions. So help me out. What am I missing?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you have them off, then I mean, let's say that you have I don't know, like a division by zero, for example, and in the past, that would raise a floating point division by zero exception. I can't really say why all the other compilers and platforms have that turned off by default, except possibly that it's just such an easy situation to get into. And I'm speculating here, but most exceptions are things that you have a bit of control over ahead of time.
Yep.
But with floating points, it can happen so easily with numerical data that you might work on an app that processes billions of data points, and there'll be one in there that causes an issue. Maybe, and I'm speculating here, but maybe that was why it was turned off, because what you'll get with a division by zero, if an exception is turned off, is you'll get not a number as a result. So you'll still get a floating point value. It would just be the nan, not a number value, and then all operations done on that afterwards will be nan, not a number. And that can be better to deal with. You can just have special values that indicate, okay, something went wrong, but everything else still works.
Mm.
So maybe I'm just speculating here. I don't have insight into why Visual C or C# or whatever have the behavior they do, but that's my guess.
All right. I guess the key thing is if for people like me who still struggle with this, we can turn it back to how it was.
Exactly. Yeah. We always try to make sure you can keep everything how it was if you want, and yes, you definitely easily can.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the other message there is platform consistency. It's good to be consistent, and there's no reason to be different just for the sake of being different.
No, I guess, yeah, you're right. I mean, there is a lot of value in consistency and predictability, and not having these strange things happen, without unexpected. So definitely, it's just, I've probably got to get used to the fact that, things change.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going back through the questions, and I think, there were other questions, but we kind of dealt with them in the thing, and in some cases I think they're a little bit specific. If you can't think of anything else, and if nobody puts one in the next few seconds, I think we might have taken up enough time of these good people.
Sure. Well, it was certainly a very long webinar, and I think almost everyone has stayed online for it, looking at the attendee list, which I'm really grateful for, and thank you. So I trust it was interesting. And as I mentioned, you can see it was a long webinar, but we still haven't covered everything that's new in version 12. We really chose some of the most impactful things, but it is a vast release, so do check out the what's new. Yesterday as well, I posted we've run several of these webinars now, and we have the Q&A log from each. So I collected, we're talking hundreds of questions here, hundreds and hundreds. But I went through and scanned all of them and collected the ones that appeared the most, that have been asked, like 5 times or more or something, and put them in a large blog post that answered the most frequently answered questions, and I posted that yesterday. So if you just go to blogs.embarcadero.com, check that out, and hopefully, if you might find your question there. And look, if you don't, just drop us an email, or drop Malcolm an email, or me, or anyone else. We love getting emails and talking to you, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
And then I've just popped the link to that article in the chat window in GoToMeeting, and we've had a couple of comments from people for thank you for the AU friendly time zone. So that I've been thinking about this for a little while, but with the launch it seemed like an obvious one. But I think if people found it useful, I might try and do this more frequently for not just launch webinars, but maybe other webinars that I think have got a broader interest amongst the community. So anyway, if you guys see a webinar coming up and you don't feel like getting up at 2 in the morning to watch it, let me know and we can try and arrange a local time.
Yeah, I think it's great to have things around the world. You might remember the years ago we had sort of 3 webinars, sort of 8 hours apart each.
Yeah.
Very, those are mega days. But I think we moved to sort of one that we tried to put in the best time zone for everyone that doesn't quite work for everyone, and it's really nice to have something like this that is just in a really good time for everyone in this region.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Glad to have it.
Oh, and Paul's giving you some credit in here, saying David is a huge asset to Embarcadero and retention. So there you go.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really kind of you. But all of this is a team effort. You're seeing a huge release from so many people here, and I just happen to be the talking head. thank you, though. It's a very nice comment.
Yes. All right. Well, on that happy note, why don't we end it? So thank you very much, David, for your time, and thank you everyone for jumping on. This may very well be the last time that I get to talk to you guys prior to Christmas and the summer break. So I hope everybody has some relaxing time off and some time with their friends and family. Same for you, David, actually. So have a good one.
Yeah, thanks. I've almost forgotten Christmas is coming up. I've been trying to avoid all the Christmas carols everywhere, but I have got whammed several times, if you're familiar with that, where you hear that one particular song. So
yes,
unavoidable.
My son is
have a great Christmas.
He's participating in Whamageddon at the moment at his school.
Yeah,
so he's still alive, but he's wandering around in shopping centres very cautiously.
Well, it's impressive he's managed to go so long without it.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. As we mentioned before, any follow-up questions or anything you want clarified, just let us know on our website or malcolm@codepartners.com. You probably know how to get hold of us, but yeah, just send us an email through and we'll get you connected up with the right people.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you all, and thank you all for sticking with us through such a long webinar as well.
Yeah, I'm quite impressed. All right, but I'm sure we all need a bathroom break at this point, so let's wrap it up.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.